Alrighty guys, today we are going to be discussing food webs and the 10% rule. So in terms of what we want to make sure that we focus on for today's assignment, we want to make sure that we focus on how different animals interact with their environment and how animals interact with other animals. And so in the food webs, that's what we're really going to focus on. So we're going to focus on the bottom of this food web. So here's where you have your producer. Now, if you remember what a producer is, it is an organism that's able to produce its own food. And in this case, this corn is a producer and it's also an autotroph. Now, that particular corn is going to be eaten by, let's say, for instance, a grasshopper. That grasshopper is going to get eaten by a frog, and then that frog will then get eaten by a bird. So you can see that there are different interactions going on. But what's so cool about food webs is that you can see that, yeah, you can have a frog that eats the grasshopper, but then if it eats all the grasshoppers, then what happens to that deer mouse? That deer mouse then has a possibility of switching to their different types of food items, and it focuses primarily on corn. And so that's what's the powerful tool that we can use with food webs in looking at different interactions. Now, whenever we're talking about these other organisms as well, so our grasshopper is a consumer, but specifically the type of consumer it is that it is an herbivore. We noted that in terms of the grasshopper and the corn, the deer mouse eats both of those things. And so that deer mouse is a consumer and an omnivore. Okay, so it gets the designation of C and O. It's a consumer and an omnivore. Okay, so the corn down here gets the P for producer. And then both bird and frog get the designation of consumer, and they are carnivores. Okay, so they primarily eat other animals. Now, in terms of the example that I just also explained earlier in this video, we can also have an energy pyramid. Okay, so that energy pyramid shows the base of the pyramid being the producer, so the corn at the very bottom. And you can see that the corn is eaten by the grasshopper, which is eaten by the frog, which is eaten by the bird. Okay, so in this case, whenever we're talking about this energy pyramid and how it relates, we can see that the foundation is always going to start with that corn. So all the energy that you get from a food web is going to come from the corn that gets its energy from the sun. So let's just assume that we have 10,000 kilojoules available. So 10,000 kilojoules is the amount of energy that that particular corn produces. And so in this case, if it has 10,000 kilojoules, the 10% rule is that only 10% of that will transfer. So in other words, we lose about 90% of that energy. And that 90% of that energy could come from predation, so the amount of energy it requires in order to predate another organism. It could come from the different structures that we have to make that are indigestible. So things like cartilage and bone. Generally, those are not digestible, so you're going to lose some energy from that as well. And so, and other things that could occur as well is the different types of metabolic processes. So that 90% lost could also be due to heat alone. And so in terms of only 10% of that energy being transferred from one organism to the next, let's see how that works. So 10,000 kilojoules, that grasshopper is only going to receive about 1,000 kilojoules. And then if we have the frog that eats the grasshopper, all of a sudden it only gets 100 kilojoules. And then that bird would only receive 10 kilojoules. Now, this is in reference, that 10 kilojoules is in reference to the amount of energy that that bird would receive from the corn. Okay, so it could get different amounts of energy based off of different interactions that the other organisms get. But in terms of the 10% rule and where that originates from, each step that you have will only account for about 10% that's being transferred. So looking at that energy pyramid again, that would be 10,000, and that's going to go to 1,000, that's going to go to 100, and then ultimately 10 kilojoules. So you can see that we're losing a lot of energy per trophic level. And so these are different trophic levels that we see. And a trophic level is just simply the amount of energy within that particular area. So this one has 10,000 kilojoules, that's one trophic level. Second trophic level only gets 1,000 kilojoules. Alrighty guys, so there will be a practice problem that I'm going to post on Schoology. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks guys.